What is tax residence? There's a lot of confusion by folks who are looking to go offshore and live the nomad capitalist lifestyle about what this very important term means. So in this video, I'm going to go back to basics and explain exactly what is tax residence, how you get it, and why it matters to you. Hey guys, I'm Andrew Henderson, and if you'd like to learn how our Nomad Capitalist team of real-world practitioners can help you create and execute an offshore strategy, you can learn more at nomadcapitalist.com. Now let's talk about tax residence. I'm going to try and keep this simple because there's no way to make a video that speaks to every unique country and every unique situation. But I can tell you this is a very misunderstood concept. So let's start with the basics. What is tax residence not? Tax residence does not mean that you have a residence permit in a country. Temporary residence, permanent residence. These can be connected, but they are different things. A couple years ago, someone that we were working with referred us to his friend, and we started helping his friend and making some suggestions. And I said, I think it was, I wanted him to get Mexican residence. And he said, okay, cool, here's your plan. Spent a couple weeks putting it together. And then he came back to my team and he said, wait a second, I researched and the taxes in Mexico are not low at all. What are you guys doing? And I pointed out that there's a big difference between being a resident in a country and being a tax resident. Okay? Simply having a residence permit may only require you to spend 1 day a year in a country. It may not subject you to tax at all. There are certain exemptions from being a tax resident in certain countries when you move there for the first 4 or 5, 10 years. Okay? So simply being resident in a country in a physical sense does not necessarily mean that you are a tax resident. Let's start with my tax quadrant that I often talk about, which is you have to consider you personally and your business, and you have to consider where you're leaving and where you're arriving. So let's focus on you and let's focus on where you're leaving. Let's say you live in Canada. You've lived there your entire life. It's your home. You have a family there. You have a home there, whether it's a lease or an owned home that you live in. You drive a car. You have all kinds of different connections to Canada. So you are a tax resident there, and because Canada has a residential system of taxation, as most Western countries do, that means you pay if you live in the country, you pay them on all of your income from worldwide sources. Okay? It doesn't mean that if you leave Canada, you pay Canada on your worldwide income. It simply means if you live there, anything you earn anywhere in the world is taxable. You are their tax resident. So for Canadians, Australians, Brits, Germans, everyone but Americans basically, the process is to not be a tax resident anymore. And so how do you do that? Well, there are different ways to go about it. There are different schools of thought. Different countries operate differently. But the general theme, in my opinion, it's becoming more difficult. In general, it's a good idea for a country to know, hey, here's where I'm going. It's not simply enough in many cases to say, I don't live here anymore, but where do you live? Nowhere. But, it doesn't really work that well anymore. And so what you'd like to do is you'd like to find a way to not be tax resident in a high tax country, like the one that you're living in now, and to be tax resident in a country where they tax you just a little or not at all. Okay? And so there are ways to do that. There are countries that offer you tax residence. You can go and live in certain countries and for a certain period of time gain that status. Lots of different ways to get it. So you want to shed the one that charges you a lot of money and gain one generally that doesn't charge you anything or a lot of money, and hopefully gain one that doesn't really interfere with your lifestyle too much. Okay? And that's what we do the planning on. You have to put the lifestyle together with the obligations for the tax, together with the obligations for everything else. And so there's a lot of confusion over what can make you a tax resident. It used to be, and in some countries it still is, that there was strictly what's called a days test. Okay? A lot of people know the magic number 183 days. And so what I'll hear people saying is, oh, if you spend fewer than 183 days in your country, then they can't tax you. Well, number one, you don't have any closer connection to any other country because you're there for 182 days. Where else could you possibly be for any substantial longer period? Okay? And so that's just the first factor. What countries are increasingly using is, where's your center of life? Where is your closer connection? Where's your family? Do you have available accommodation? That's one that's been in use for a while. There are all kinds of different factors. Now, you have certain countries around the world that are, emerging countries or newly developing countries where their tax systems are not super strict and super robust, to where all they might have is a day's test. Okay, I have residence, for example, in the country. It's pretty cut and dry. 183, you're paying on your worldwide income. 182, we don't care. We're leaving you alone because their tax code is rather simple. Most countries in the Western world, most developed countries in Europe, the US, Canada, Australia, there's a lot of shades of gray. I've told numerous stories about how a guy left one surfboard behind, that kind of thing, and they came after him and said, "You're our tax resident." And so what you want to make sure that you're doing is proper planning. There's a formal process to go through for every country, and we can't go into every country here. There's a formal process to go through for every country to leave your tax residence behind and then go out and get a new one. It's possible to be nomadic. I'm not saying you've got to be chained to one place for 12 months a year, but you want to have a place that is your fiscal residence, basically. Where are you liable to pay tax? And so there are countries where you can be liable to pay tax, but you pay zero, right? We have a guy right now, he makes a couple $1 million a year, and he went and bought a home in the Cayman Islands, and he's going to spend a substantial period of time in the Cayman Islands. And then he's going to go out and say, okay, hey Canada, I'm in the Cayman Islands. It's my, I have my home here. I have all the things that I need for life. It's my center of life. My wife is here. My child is here. Like, I'm barely in your country. That could pass some scrutiny. So this is not tax advice. Everyone's situation is different. We look at every case that we look at with our tax lawyers and our accountants, and we analyze, what needs to be done on a holistic level, both where you are now and where you're going. Both factors, arriving and leaving, both very important. So to be clear, tax residence, very important thing to understand. You want to understand where you have it. You want to make sure you don't have it where you don't want it. And you want to make sure that nobody can ever come and knock on your door 5 years later. It has nothing to do with residence itself. It does have to do with physical presence in some cases, although there are some countries where even though you spend more than 6 months a year, and even though they have residential tax systems, sometimes, if you don't own a home here, and if you don't have any income from here, you don't have to pay. We were currently working on a bunch of tax research from Mexico. In theory, if you spent 6 months in Mexico, you should be paying tax. But we're finding that there are ways where certain people wouldn't have to, even if they spent a majority of their time in Mexico. And so that's one area where it kind of goes the other way. In other Western countries, if you started spending too close to the 6 months, it could cause you a problem. So every country is vastly different. The physical presence that you spend in a country does make a difference. In some cases, even if you don't live there, even if you're just there as a tourist, if you spend too much time in the United States under the substantial presence test, you don't need a residence permit. You don't need to be a citizen. They can suck you in. Watch our video on the substantial presence test. So tax residence, you want to understand where you have it, you want to understand where you don't, and you want to make sure you've got a plan for that. How can Nomad Capitalist help you? 4 ways. Number 1, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to make sure you get our new video every day. Number 2, get a copy of Nomad Capitalist, the book. You'll learn a lot of my personal experiences over a dozen years of studying this stuff, as well as exactly some of the strategies that you can use to build your Nomad Capitalist plan. Number 3, if you're not sure where to start, but you want to come and learn from my team and I, you want to come and mingle with like-minded people, learn more about our live conference, Nomad Capitalist Live. It's coming up soon. And number 4, if you want some help right now because you've got a burning issue, you need something solved, you want to lower your taxes, get a second passport, or build the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle of your dreams, go to nomadcapitalist.com and click on Become a Client.